good evening, and welcome to our session today. Can't believe that we're already in our week 4. The session for today is the theme of systems mapping. And for today, it's me and Joss who's going to host you. And I hope you can see me okay. I am Asra. I'm joining you all from Bonn, and we have Joss who is joining us from London. Please take a moment to write in the chat where you're joining us from because we would like to know and also facilitate a collaborative learning with all of you. So today we find ourselves here in the 8th guide of the total 20 guides that we have in our Systems Innovations network. So we have about 20 guides and we divide it into 4 sections: systems thinking, systems mapping, transition design, and ecosystem building. And we hope that we encourage you to go through all the guides so you can get a good understanding of the entire process of systems innovation. These are the 9 events that we have listed every Wednesday happening at 6 p.m. CET. We are now here at week 4 and we encourage you to come and join us for the next 5 events as well. So you get a good overview. So the resources that we are using for today are the systems mapping guide and the mapping leverage points canvas. This is going to be continued in the next session. Some important information for us to keep in mind for the entire session is that this session will run for about 90 minutes. It is mainly divided into 2 main sections. The first section is where we understand what this guide is about, what is systems mapping. And the second section is where we understand and reflect on the concepts that we have learned in the presentation to a challenge statement in this canvas. We hope that this session is going to ask us questions and also put up the stickies wherever so you understand and apply immediately. We are live streaming today on YouTube, so you can always go back and refer to the places in the video where you think you're stuck or you always wanted to come back and refer to. 2 main goals for us for the Systems Innovator Learning Series is that we would like to encourage and help you learn systems innovation better and give you a hands-on experience with our tools. If you're new to our workshops, then you should know that we actually use Miroboard as a platform to do an interactive learning session. I hope by now Joss has already shared the link to the Miroboard in the chat. You can look at it. So for today's icebreaker session, we have this question, which is, how do you think systems mapping might help you in your context? I will bring all of you to me so you can gather around this part of the board. So this is quite simple. You just have to click on the sticky and then a cursor will appear. You can grab your thoughts around the question for today. Maybe I'll pause for about a minute and run a timer so you get some ample amount of time to do that. If you're done putting stickies for the icebreaker session, there is a section just below that where you can add your name and links to any website or LinkedIn profile that you would want people to connect you over with. And if you have been coming to us regularly in the past events, you can just grab a sticky on the left side and put it on your profile there. Okay, so I will maybe start reading a few stickies and um, we have one sticky here which says to understand the level of detail we need to go when laying out systems. That's quite interesting. Often do systems mapping to understand work as done rather than work as imagined. It helps you with the concreteness of how all the factors are connected and how the system is laid. To understand the system and give impulses to system renewal. That's interesting. Also quite innovative insight. To understand huge systems and problems and unlock collective understanding of systems, visualize a complex environment within the context, appreciating and acknowledging the complexity. Often do yeah, I did that. I'm sorry. Multiple systems being used in regions across the globe, utilized by thousands of colleagues. Um, these are some interesting stickies. Joss, would you like to add something there?
Yes, this one helped me to help me see the direction of relationships. Yeah, it's about visualizing the elements and interrelationships within a complex system. So I mean, I think the visualizing, the visual representation, also communications is a really important part of it. To help workshop participants visualize systems complexity. Great. I'll stay moving on then. It's great to see you all here this evening, and yeah, we're almost at 60 people already, so lots of interest in this topic. It is one of the ones that people find very useful for themselves. So we're going to have a bit of a presentation, talk about what it is, and how we might be using it, and then of course a little workshop over here with Asra. So hopefully you have the Miroboard and the link there if you in the chat if you need it. I'm going to jump in. We have 90 minutes, so let's start at the top. What are systems maps? What are we talking about here? Actually, maybe you want to put in the chat, how aware are you of systems maps? What are they? 0 for you have absolutely no idea, 10 for you're an absolute expert. Just to get an idea of that. Okay, we've got 7, 4, 5, 6, 6, 8, 8, 5, 3. Okay, and you. Okay, we're kind of in the middle here. Oh, we've got a few zeros and ones. Alrighty, we're generally in the middle. Great, lots of 5s and 4s. All right, I'm going to stay going. So when we talk about systems maps, they are ways of representing a system. Can be simple, but often it's a complex system. So what do we mean by a system? This is a system. It's the model of a system that's emerged over the past centuries, really. It's probably always been with us, but particularly during the Industrial Revolution, engineers were trying to think about mechanical systems like the steam engine and conversion and processing of inputs, the fuels into outputs of heat and motion, and what was the waste, the entropy, and the boundaries of the system, and so forth. So they started to develop this model of a system that we inherit today, which is quite an amazing thing, if you ask me. It applies to all systems in the universe, and that's quite astounding, really. Everything from a family to a steam engine, if you want, or a bicycle, or a city, or a classroom. For an economy, right? So this is quite amazing stuff, really. It's a very general model, right? So we see elements in the center there. Those are things. Can be the students in your classroom, can be the buildings in your city, can be the banks in your financial system. And those elements have interrelationships. So a system is a set of elements that have relationships between them. Through which they form an overall pattern of organization that is fulfilling some function. So you have the elements, the interrelationships, and then there's a function. This thing does something. That's the point about systems. Things that aren't systems, we call them sets, and they don't do things. So a pile of stones, as we talked about before, is a set. It doesn't do anything in and of itself. Whereas a system, like a biological cell in our body, or in a plant, it does something. It takes in resources over here and it processes them through this network of relations and some process, and it produces an output, some kind of work. It also produces waste. It has a boundary, like the membrane of that cell. It exists in environment and so forth. So that applies to all systems in the universe. So it's quite incredible. We're not going to go into all of that right now, but what we do see here is there's stuff going on inside this, and that's actually what we're looking at today. When we talk about systems map, we're saying, okay, we want to understand better what's going on inside this system. It's a productive conversation to ask about the system as a whole, but it's quite an abstract thing. So if this was an education system, it'd be, if you're working on systems innovation like we are in this course and trying to learn about that, it would be a productive conversation, in education to say, okay, how do we want to transform this education system? What's the output? What's the function of this system? And what's dysfunctional output? And what's the boundary? And what's the environment that exists? All of those are really useful conversations. When we talk about systems mapping, we're actually zooming in on what's going on inside here. We want to know what these elements are, and we want to know what the relationships between them are, and what's the dynamic created out of that set of interrelationships. Because there's always a dynamic. When you put things together, like a team, a group of people, or you put a family, right? If a family are going on holiday and you put them in a car, they drive for 10 hours, there's going to be a dynamic going on there in that family between the children and the parents and the two parents and so forth. Or if we take a team, when you put a new member in, there's already a pattern there, a culture, a way of working, so on and so forth. And that's the dynamic within the system. It's the elements and how they relate to each other. It's the organization. And that's what we're looking at. We're trying to understand that when we say systems mapping. So a system, this is a system. Her Majesty's or His Majesty's Prison and Prohibition Service in the United Kingdom. So quite a system, isn't it? But just like a cell, or just like you or me, or the organization we work in, it has exact same features to it of a system. There are elements there, right? All different parts. You've got the judiciary somewhere here, you've got identification, you've got, courtrooms, you've got prohibition, jails, and so forth. And they're interrelated, right? It's not a random set of things, they're coordinated in a particular way. It serves a function and it takes in resources. A lot of money and time and energy and so forth goes into this. It produces waste. Sometimes it's dysfunctional, a lot of material waste, and it also serves some function. And that's why it exists. And that's why we're interested in it, because it serves a function. And we're doing systems innovation because we believe it's not serving its function effectively. And we want to try and reorganize the way this thing works to fulfill its function in a better way, or transform the way it fulfills its function. To do that, we need to understand the system. So here we go. That's what we're talking about, the internal workings of a food system. It has these elements in it, and they are interrelated in a particular way. And that's what we're doing when we make a systems map. So some people get very confused about systems maps because they see all these complicated systems dynamics models, all these pluses and minuses and feedback loops and all of that, and they get very they think it's very complicated, but really it's very simple. This is the essence of a systems map. If it was your family, you would just say, okay, there's 4 people in my family, mom, dad, me, and my sister. And I'm going to put 4 things up, and then we're going to draw lines between them to say how they're interrelated. My mum is my mum, so that's how she's related to me, and I'm related to my sister in that way, and so forth. And that's a systems map, because we're a system as a family. So it can be as simple as that. It can be incredibly complex. We're going to look at some of those today. But the essence of it is this. And here's my favorite systems map. I don't know if you've seen this one. It's the industrial cup of tea. So here's a lady making a cup of tea for herself. I just made a cup of tea for myself, actually, right here. It's 5 o'clock in the UK, so, it's a ritual. And I made a cup of tea, and it took a tea bag. There's definitely a tea bag there. It took some heat, and it took some water, and that heat came from somewhere. It came from the electric grid, and that energy in the electric grid came from somewhere, and it went all the way back to oil and gas. And we've got all the natural resources up here. To get this tea, we had to have an agricultural system, tea pickers, people packaging these tea bags and making tea boxes, and companies, insurance, and HR, and then coming out of this, we've also got waste. That tea bag's going to be thrown away. We've got that packaging going landfills, we've got sewage going into rivers. Well, hopefully not going to rivers, but ideally not. A box of plastic, so on and so forth. So that is the system behind a very simple action of making a cup of tea. You can see how complex systems can get. Of course, it's fulfilling a function of making my cup of tea, or this person's cup of tea. But again, you see these are elements in that system, the water, the tea plants and the pickers and so forth, tea box and companies. Interrelationships, they're all interrelated, is performing a function and it has inputs here. You see it says inputs that it's taking in all these natural resources and so forth, and outputs here. It's going to produce a function and some waste also. Any questions on this so far? Or do we have a question section as well?
No, no. We do have a question section at the center there,
This one?
just below that, yes.
Okay, if you have any questions, you can put them up there.
Just below that, yeah.
Alrighty. Great, someone's working at Her Majesty's prohibition system. Yeah, any questions so far? Everybody understand the idea that we're talking about? Not very complicated, right? It's a very basic, very abstract model. Hopefully I'm not losing you so far. And that's what we'll talk about. Everybody happy? Looks like we are okay. We will stay going. Good. So the stuff we're going to cover today is this here, right? Maps, the basics of them. And then we can start to talk about causal relationships between those maps. We can talk about, ever more complex maps. We can also talk about the feedback loops that get created when we have these kind of causal relationships. One thing affects another, and then that comes back to affect the first. And that's going to create certain dynamics, as I was talking about in the system. And when we get a set of those dynamics, reoccurring kind of patterns that we often see in systems, we call that a systems archetype. And we'll try and get to talking about some of that as we go along. So here's the basics of a map. As I was mentioning, we've got a city here, and we might try and map that out. We've got many different dimensions, so we need to firstly identify the nodes, the elements. So, for example, we made a map for the city of Medina in Saudi Arabia, and they wanted to map out all the different systems they had in their city. So we made about 10 of them, tourism and waste management and what else was there? Yeah, transport and so forth. So how we started was we went and researched and talked to them. Well, what are all the elements in this tourist system, should we say, or waste management system? We do a whole part of research and we see, well, which are the most important elements which keep on coming up. And then you make a list of those, right? And those are going to be the elements in your system because they're very important. So those are the things. And then there are linkages between those things. Supplier here is linked to a distributor here, and that's an exchange. It's a relationship of some kind. Can be linked in multiple ways, but it kind of depends, what are we interested in here? This linkage is obviously going to be one of, exchange of goods and potentially finance and so forth. So that's what we mean by linkage. So you're going to create those linkages and try and post up all your nodes and all your relationships, and then you're starting to get a system. You also want to define your boundary, which depends on what you're interested in. Of course, systems go on for everything forever, and everything's interconnected. So you're going to have to draw a boundary and say, this is always relative to what you're inquiring about. In the context of systems innovation, this exists in the context of a bigger project where you're trying to make change happen. And this map is there to help you understand the system and then think about intervention points, as we'll talk about next week. So that's going to set the scope of your map. So you could talk about, the Amazon rainforest. There's so much going on in the Amazon rainforest, companies and, the government and indigenous communities and so on and so forth. But that's too much, right? What are we interested in? We're interested in how to prevent logging, illegal logging in the Amazon rainforest. Well, that's going to set the boundary of what we're interested in and set a scope for what we're doing. We're going to put up the things that are relevant in that context of the project, of the initiative we're running. So people always ask about that question of boundaries. They always say, isn't this so complex? Where do you draw the boundary? The boundary is always relative to what you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to do. You want this thing to work for you at the end of the day. It's not an objective representation of, the world and the whole of the Amazon. It's relative to what you're interested in. Okay. And that's that really as simple as it can be. Elements and relationships. Let's take a look at some of these. This one here is a stakeholder map. So when we say stakeholders, we mean people. And again, this one's relative to what these people are interested in. So these are the people who are in our Mumbai hub in India, and they were part of the map system competition. And the challenge they had in India is around student depression and suicide. And they wanted to understand that. Who are the actors affecting that? So obviously, we have the students in the center. That's the focus of our interest. And around them, we have the primary stakeholders who are influencing them: the parents, friends, student bodies, faculty, administration, campus, counselors. And then they've drawn this, so they posted those up. They obviously did some research here, and they maybe collected all of these, or maybe they started with who are the most immediate ones, and they posted those up and started drawing relationships between them, as you could see. Someone noted that the parents seem to be affecting the students because the arrow is just going one way. The students don't affect the parents. That's a bit funny, but anyway, the friends affect the students, and the students affect the friends. Student body affects the students, so on and so forth. Student body then affects the faculty. The faculty affects administration, campus, counselors, and so on. So then around those are the secondary factors, actors, I should say, who are influencing these people, the primary actors. And around those, we have tertiary. So we have here, we can see the media is influencing the friends, who's influencing the students, but also the media is directly influencing the students, right? Non-for-profits are influencing the student body, which is influencing, well, the students. We have higher education institutions, which is a big actor here, but it's actually indirect, isn't it? Because they're affecting the faculty, which is affecting the student, but they're affecting a lot of stuff. Campus, counselors, police, campus recruitment, and so on. Any questions around this one? It's all quite straightforward when you start from the basics.
But we do have a question in the chat there by Aaron. What are we looking for in relationships between the elements? This
Yeah,
seems like important context as we are mapping.
it depends again on what the question you're asking. It's all relative to the question that you're asking, isn't it? So here we're asking the question of ultimately how can we do something about the situation of student depression and suicide. This one's about influence, like who's actually influencing who here. So that's the nature of the relationships. But again, this could be a supply chain where we're interested in the movement of products or the movements of finance, and we can have multiple, connections if it's relevant. But the challenge is always complexity, right? You can see how complex this can get quickly. So we only want the information that we need there. We can't have all the information. So the type of relationship is always relative to the question that we're asking. Okay, let's stay going. Here's another one. This is poverty and, well, poverty generally, actually, and called the ecosystem of poverty. And this one's structured differently. So I'm trying to get to the idea that maps can be organized in different ways. This one here was about kind of what was the stakeholder one. So it was not about things. It was about people and organizations. And it was organized in concentric circles of influence because that's what they're interested in. So it's always relative to the question that you're asking and the project that you're doing. Over here, they're asking a different question. What's leading to poverty, and what are the consequences of being poor? I think this is in emerging economies or developing economies somewhere. So here, the direct thing that's leading into poverty is, of course, lack of income. You have no money. But there are secondary things that are leading into that, right? Inadequate livelihoods, diverted funds, and corruption. So if we start all the way back here, aid programs, but there's corruption, and corruption leads to diverted funds, so people aren't getting income, so they end up in poverty. And you can, it goes all over the place there. So on the right-hand side, we're seeing the things that are leading into poverty. On the left, we're seeing things that come out the left or going vertical also a bit. So poverty, if you're poor, what's that going to lead to? Lack of capital, lack of education, potentially, lack of services, inadequate housing, lack of healthcare. But then you can see, you keep on following these through. So if you have lack of education, you're probably going to have lack of skills, and that's going to come all the way back around to unemployment. Unemployment leads back into lack of income, which leads into poverty. And that's interesting. It's like a circle, isn't it? They call that the poverty trap. Once you get into it, it's difficult to get out of it. It's kind of a reinforcing loop. There's another one here around healthcare. Lack of healthcare. If you're poor, it'll be difficult to get adequate healthcare, which means you may get ill or be ill because you can't get healthcare. And that's probably going to lead to unemployment. If you get ill, you can't sustain your job. And that may lead to, well, that will lead to lack of income, very likely, and back into poverty. So it's another one of those kind of cycles that's leading into a poverty trap. Any comments about that one?
We do have two questions in the chat. One by Harry. He asked, can we include specific people as well as stakeholder groups on the same stakeholder map? Is it relative to what you're trying to do?
Do you want to refine that, Harry? Yeah.
Yes, sorry. Having done many stakeholder maps in the past, they can become quite sort of unwieldy sort of documents. And I was just more asking with these examples, say for instance, the one we're on before, yes, that one you're kind of hovering over. Is it okay to have someone on there, like just for example, the head of casework, as well as governing bodies on there, different stakeholder groups? Or do you feel like having just one particular type of stakeholder on there is better?
Well, I think again, it's all relative to the question. The question is like, who actually influences students, right? If you're really trying to address this challenge, your question is, well, what's actually influencing these students? Who are the actors? So for me, it's all relative to that, isn't it, Harry?
Yeah, thank you.
And yeah, you're always trying to manage the complexity because we'll look at some later on. They get very complex, these things. Any other questions or comments?
We do have one question from Jack, who asked, the relationship decisions decide what influenced what seems very subjective. I think it's more of a statement, but
Okay, I'll keep going then. So let's take a look at some more, actually. I think this is a great way to start. We will do a little bit more theory as we go along, but these are really interesting maps, right? This one's from British Columbia, where they're trying to understand opioid crisis. So understanding the complexity of the overdose crisis in British Columbia, leverage points of change. So they obviously went out, did a lot of research, and came back, and you can see the way they've represented it here. It's different again. So hopefully you get this idea. There's different ways of doing this, all depending on the question that you're answering. So you're trying to answer. So they're looking for leverage points. They're asking what's going on here, but where can we intervene, which is a key thing coming out of systems maths, because you always have to, if you're engaged in systems change, there's always going to be the need to intervene, and you always want to act strategically in those interventions, and that's essentially why we're doing this, and also to build a shared narrative around the whole system. So they did all the research, and they pulled out, which ones have the most connection, which factors, society's negative belief and attitude, stigma towards drug use. So these are factors affecting this, and they're saying these ones are some of the most connected ones, the big red ones, right? Cultural notions around chronic pain and pain treatment, public service gaps. You can see all the linkages there again to the things that are kind of secondary and tertiary in terms of they're represented in terms of the number of linkages. So that's that. This one's pandemic, just to help you build up kind of a good image of what we're talking about when we say maps, or what they look like, and all the factors affecting that. Everything from the functioning immune system to policy interventions, economic activity and trade and business closure and air pollution and all sorts of things going on. And that's just the beginning. If we talk about the pandemic, that had all across society, it had effects on economy and environment. So we're starting to see a little bit of the complexity here. Going to stay going. We are going to talk about these pluses and minuses now. So you can see the arrow there, and it's a little plus and minus. And this one we call a causal map. And by causal, we mean the relationships between two different things. We're not just saying this thing's connected to that. We're saying something about this thing causing an effect on that in some way. So it's saying something about international trade here moves in relation to economic activity. And you can see pluses and minuses there. So let's maybe unpack that a little bit. And this is getting to a particular type of map, which is a causal map. And by causal, we're looking at how this thing affects this thing, right? So let's just take a look at that. We have the amount of rain in my garden, and we have the number of snails in my garden. And we know those two things, there's some relationship there, right? If it gets really dry, not going to be many snails, they're going to disappear off down holes and find damp places. If it starts raining, they all start coming out. So those are two variables. They're not things, they're variables, because we're not talking about a snail, we're talking about the number of snails. We're not talking about the weather or a cloud. We're talking about how wet it is, how much rain there is, right? So those are variables. And those things can go up, variables can go up and down. There can be more or less rain in my garden. There can be more or less snails in my garden. And we're saying actually there's a connection between those things. Other things, there's no connection between them. But these variables, we believe there's a connection between them. We believe if the amount of rain goes up, we think there's going to be more snails. So let's draw a link there and say they're correlated in some way. And there's different ways that they could be correlated, what we call positive or negative. So if more of A leads to more of B, so if we get more rain and it leads to more snails, we say that's a positive causal relation. If, on the other hand, they move in the different direction, the opposite direction. So let's take a look at one of those. I think we have one here somewhere, don't we? Maybe not, but an example would be, say, predators and prey within an ecosystem, right? So if we have foxes here, if we have more foxes, we're going to have less rabbits over here because they're going to eat the rabbits, very likely. So they're moving in a different direction. Number of foxes and number of rabbits in our ecosystem is a negative causal relationship. They're going opposite directions. If there's less foxes, potentially going to be more rabbits. So they're moving in opposite directions. These ones, they're moving in the same direction. And that's what's going on up here. So all these pluses and minuses, right? So you see this economic activity is causally related, is what they're saying, to unemployment rate. So if we think about this now, it's got a negative sign, and that means it's one of these negative causal relations. So that means it's going in a different direction. So let's just think about that for a second. If you have more economic activity, well, the unemployment rate is going to go down. So that does make sense. More economic activity, less unemployment, or unemployment rate is going to go down. That makes a lot of sense. So I think they came up with a good mix there, or a good relation there. We've got business closure, and there's a plus sign there. So anybody want to explain this to me? What's going to go on here? Anybody feeling brave? If we have more business closures, what's going to happen to unemployment rate? And you put in the chat, it's going to go up, right? Harry, Sunny, it's going to go up. Yes. So that makes sense, doesn't it? That there's a positive causal relation. More business closures, more unemployment. Less business closures, less unemployment. Okay, this is starting to make sense, right? What else we got going on over here? Let's see. Conflict of interest, data science and modeling. So we've got data science and modeling of this is the testing, I guess they're talking about, and yeah, the cases of COVID. So if we have data science and modeling, better data science and modeling, and then we've got speed of government action. So it's saying if we have better data science and modeling, we can have faster government speed of action. Makes sense. Better information, quicker decisions they can make. Poor data and information, poor speed of reaction, low speed of reaction. And then you say government speed of actions related to policy interventions. So hopefully you understand this. People understand it? Anybody not get this idea? Any questions or comments? Effects of the tariffs? Yes, I'm sure there's one out there. And imagine how complex it would be. Like, it'd be vastly more complex than this, wouldn't it? All the ramifications across the whole global economy. And all these people, I was trying to think about it last night. It's a bit mind blowing, isn't it? All the implications. Any questions on this causal relationships? Let's go down here, take a look at another one. Nice simple one here. Student achievement in school. This is how well a student does in school. And we can see we've got a few things. Students' native ability. So we're saying it's positively causal relationship there. So if their native ability is high, they're likely to achieve well in school. So that makes a lot of sense. There's a plus sign there. There's a negative sign here between family stress and student achievement in school. Also, more family stress, lower achievement in school would make sense, right? So that's good. And higher, yeah, or if we say lower family stress, higher achievement in school. We always move in the opposite direction. Teacher talent and resources, more of that's likely to lead to higher student achievement in school. Substance abuse in the community, likely, maybe not a direct relationship there, but likely to lead to inverse relationship. So more substance abuse in the community, potentially lower achievement in school, and vice versa. Hopefully you're understanding this idea. Hopefully it's demystifying all these pluses and minuses that we see. Here we go. Do you want to drag your little dot up there and tell us 1 to 10? Are you understanding this causal relations, positive and negatives? I guess it's the practice that gets a bit challenging when you have a lot of pluses and minuses all over the place and trying to understand them all. But you just walk through them one at a time, and you can make sense of them. And sometimes you need, the person who made the map to kind of explain the whole thing to you before it really makes sense. Okay, so questions?
We do have a question here, which is just the one that you show on the screen, just if you were to create a casual map of an issue, maybe we can just take the issue that we discussed some time ago, the student achievement in school, and we can talk about the different key elements or factors that you would like to include in the casual map, and how do you think they would be connected? Maybe we can do that for a minute.
So this is, if we're looking at the question of student achievement in school, what would be the key factors related to that? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Okay, there'd be the elements you kind of post up there. Already?
Just for the second additional question, which is how might they be connected? You can say positive or negative. That's optional, but it would be good if you could put that there.
You want to take a look at them, Asra, or should we still go?
Yeah, the ones that I can read already are access to internet at home or having to work on the site for financial reasons could be a negative. And need to advertise data points to find the categories, which becomes the variables, and then decide on directions between variables. I think we can stay going.
Yep. Okay. We've got sleep and food and family and teachers and so forth. Great. So here's another one, a little bit more complex, made by Viliana and her team at Reimagine Futures down here. And not going to dig into all of this, but something I want to note is you can see it's all kind of organized around these core red ones here, isn't it? And what they're doing here is saying actually there's a core narrative or a core structure to this systems map that are kind of the key things at the center here. There are many dimensions to it. The different colors are looking at different dimensions of this challenge. Again, not going to go into it now. And a bit like the pandemic one we saw up here, which is nicely colored so that you can make sense of it easily like that. They've also kind of color coded the different dimensions and then put in the red ones, which they feel are kind of the core dynamic at the center of this. You can see again the pluses and the minuses, and they're talking about there's a dynamic going on here, a loop, right? If this thing, well, let's start here. If this thing affects this thing, and that affects that, and that affects that, and then it's feeding all the way back to effect here. So it's a bit like that poverty trap we saw. We're going to get a dynamic going in the system, a kind of reoccurring pattern that's going to be difficult for that system to break out of, like the poverty trap is difficult to break out of because it keeps on reinforcing itself through this dynamic. Let's take a look at those loops because that's an important part of it. Because the idea is that it's not just one thing affecting another and then the effect disappears. Well, it can come back to the first one, and that can create this feedback loop, as we call it. And there's two types again, positive and negative. And the negative ones are balancing each other, because when there's more of this, well, then there's going to be more of this, because this is positively correlated here. But then this one's negative causal relation. So what happens when this one goes up, it's going to come back and reduce this one here. And if this is reduced, then this is going to be reduced again. So what's happening is it keeps on balancing itself, keep on bringing itself back to balance. We talked about the foxes and the rabbits. Well, if we just look at, one link there, well, yeah, the foxes can grow and they can eat all the rabbits, but actually, it's not just going one way. Over time, that's going to come back, isn't it? Because if all the rabbits go extinct, what's going to happen to the foxes? They're going to go down again. And if the foxes go down, that creates opportunity for rabbits to come back into this ecosystem and grow again. And if there's more rabbits, then it comes back and it can have more foxes. So you can see this dynamic, and you see that across the board in ecosystems and all kinds of self-regulating balanced systems. This cycle where two things kind of balance each other out. So you get like an ebb and flow over time. And that's negative feedback loop. You can also get positive, where one thing is reinforcing another, and it keeps on amplifying, keeps on amplifying. Obviously, it's unsustainable. It's going to crash at some stage. A trade war is a good example of that, or an arms war is a good example of that. One company increases its weaponry, so another country needs to feel secure, and they increase their weaponry. So the first one does also. So they keep on reinforcing that, but ultimately you can't go on forever like that. So all of these positive feedback loops are ultimately unsustainable. You see them in chemistry, autocatalytic processes. One thing creates is a catalyst for itself, so it keeps on amplifying itself in an autocatalytic process, but it can be explosive and obviously only last for a short period of time. So there's what I was talking about, the rabbits and the foxes. And of course, these links don't just have to be between two, they can go between 3 or 4 or several nodes. So here's one looking at a balancing loop. between quality of product. If a company produces a quality product, customer satisfaction will go up. So here's the company producing quality products. It's positively correlated to customer satisfaction. So quality product goes up, customer satisfaction goes up, which then means demand would probably go up because these customers are satisfied and happy. So they're going to increase demand. But then if this company gets a lot of demand, it's going to be difficult to sustain the quality of product. It may go down to try and satisfy that demand. So actually, there's a balancing feedback loop here. Not going to unpack all of these. There's other interesting ones here. Taxation on businesses. Yep, that's a reinforcing loop. Here's one, development of tourism. So it says average price per night in a hotel is positively correlated to tourist industry revenue. You know, more expensive hotels, more revenue in the tourist industry. Quality of hotels can go up. And if the quality of hotels go up, then you can charge more for those nights stays, which then can feed to better revenue for the tourist industry. So that's actually self-reinforcing because they're going up. And there are many other examples of that. For example, investment in infrastructure will then support your economy to be more productive, which can mean more taxes for the government, which can then reinvest in infrastructure. So those are some of the positive feedback loops, but also balancing ones. Also, you'll find them all over the place. This is how complex systems work. It's how they manage themselves, like ecosystems. Alrighty, I'm going to stay going because I want you people to be making a map with Asra, because that's the best way to learn about all this stuff. Get to workshop, but just look here, this is how complex some of these maps get. So this is obesity. The British government commissioned this one, and they wanted to know, well, what's going on here? We have a big problem in obesity in the UK, also in the US and Mexico and China and so forth. It's a wicked problem, right? That's what we call a wicked problem. And it's difficult to know where to start. You present this to a policymaker and they're not going to like the look of it at all, right? But they're broken out again into these different dimensions: psychological, economic, food, so forth. And if you zoom in, you can see them. We've got media and consumption up here. All sorts of stuff going on, right? Smoking cessation, psychological ambivalence, desire to resolve tensions, a lot of stuff going on. Individualism, stress, food literacy, physical activity, obviously, so on and so forth. There's a lot of stuff that's physiological, it's psychological, it's social, it's economic, it's about media, it's about employment, it's about physical environment, so on and so forth. Any questions or comments about this one? See, they break it out a little bit over here. But you'd have to take time to unpack that sort of thing. And even better, you might really need someone to walk you through it who actually made that map. Yeah, okay, Catherine, we've got a complicated scenario in public health world. Stan, you're sharing Kumu, which is a great tool if you want to build these, right? Kumu.io, I think it is. Should take you there. It's a tool for building systems maps. So this one here, Liliana built this one in Kumu, which is quite a good tool. We often use, I talked about the maps that we did from Medina City. We actually use this application here, Miro, but you can use all sorts of different tools. Miro, Kumu are good ones. Yeah. Okay, so are these questions or?
Yeah, and these were the questions that I collected in the chat.
Do we speak to one or two?
Yeah, I think you just answered the one for the apps and software. So there is one by Timmy, I think, if he's here. Yeah. So is it possible to build a 3D system map to understand different layers and hierarchies in the system? That's one question.
Getting a bit more complex. You can do like multi-level network analysis. Yeah, I've never seen a 3D map, but interesting idea. But yeah, I mean, in network science, they have these multi-dimensional graphs, networks that kind of represent that.
Okay. The next question here about quantifiers by relations. I think TV, you can ask this question if you can.
Okay, yeah, I'm back. I just wrote that my philosophy when mapping out a system, I'm leaving out any quantifying words in the factors that I'm mapping out. So when I'm connected to things, I'm not writing more of this and less of this in the factor, but this is kind of the thing that I'm writing out by connecting them through relations. So the relation is telling that there's more or less of anything.
Yeah,
It's basically that what you told us with the
yeah,
plus minuses.
yeah, exactly.
It's
So
basically standard.
yeah, so you have to be careful with that, right? So if you talk about causal relation, it's not the nodes, the elements in it are not, as you say, more or less. It's not a thing. It's a variable which can go up or down, like your height or your, how much money you have, or how old you are, right? Those are all things. Those are all variables that can go up and down. But you are not a variable. Your hair is not a variable, right? So we have a hands up. Yes.
Yeah, here's.
Actually, I believe you just answered the question. It was alluding to the idea of when to include or exclude a certain variable to determine whether or not your map is too complex or too simple. But thank you for answering it in that perspective.
Yeah, well, ultimately, you're trying to get an outcome here. Like, what comes next is the question. What comes next is you got to communicate this to someone, or you've got to communicate it to your team, and they've got to make decisions about what they're going to do. So if it's too complicated, like I say with the policymakers, they're going to look at this and then they're probably going to throw it out and say, just give me something simple to do, right? So levels of complexity and all that's relative to what you're trying to achieve at the end of the day and how much you can deal with, how much you can synthesize it up into a story. You've got to create a story at the end of the day because no one's really going to look at this. They want a story about what's going on there. And that's kind of the outcome. And then what's the narrative we can create together? Because, what you should be doing here is getting the people in the system together, the relevant people, for them to create this map, because a map is not a solution. If you just give this to someone, it's like, oh, well, that's really fancy. That looks amazing. You're really intelligent, but it can just sit there because it's too overwhelming. They didn't make it and they don't understand it. If they make it and they understand it, the actors in the system, and in the process of doing that, they start to build their shared understanding of that system. They start to have a conversation to make sense as a sense-making tool of the system. Then we're starting to get somewhere, because most wicked problems are problems of different actors disagreeing about the nature of the reality and the nature of the problem and the nature of what we should do about the problem. So the map should help us in negotiating our meaning of the challenge and what we should do about it. And that's why you want to co-create maps and try to avoid getting experts to do them. Okay, so finally, just a few words about these archetypes before we move on. I'm just going to say like 2 or 3 words, 2 or 3 minutes, and then we will move on. So archetypes are patterns that we see. So we saw these kind of feedback loops, and well, here's one of them, right? An escalating arms race. This country builds more, increases its budget and weaponry. So this country thinks it needs to also, and that feeds back. So this one does also. And you see those, positive amplifying feedback loops. That's kind of an archetype. Arms race is one example. Another one here is the rich get richer. And we see this. And essentially it's saying, okay, if you have some money in the center here, and you have 2 actors over here, this one's been successful in the past and this one hasn't, well, it's very likely that you're going to end up giving your money to this person who's been successful in the past because you think they're going to be more successful. So what's going to happen is success to the successful. You're going to keep on amplifying this here, and it's going to get dampened down. So you're going to amplify out the rich getting richer, right? The disparity, the inequality. And that's a dynamic, a systems dynamic, an archetype that you see across a wide variety of systems, whether it's banking or whether it's a parent kind of favoring one child over the other one, so on and so forth. tragedy of the commons. I'm not going to go into all of this, but it's another archetype we see about how people degrade, a community can degrade its natural resources, like fishing stocks, for example, or any natural resource. The original story is around pasture and a kind of community trying to maintain that, but this one maps that kind of dynamic out. And we see, again, that's a dynamic you see in many types of systems, shifting the burden. Instead of doing what we really need to do, the fundamental solution, we have the obese person here. Well, really, they should go and do some exercise, right? But they shift the burden and they try to take the simple solution, the drugs, the quick fix. Ultimately, that has a side effect, which leads it ultimately more difficult to go and do the fundamental solution that you should have done in the first place. So we see that again all over the place, that financial crisis where governments bailed all the banks out and so forth, when in some of those cases we should have actually put them on the treadmill to slim them down and so forth. So we see that shifting. Well, there's a few there. This is shifting the burden, and we see that it's an archetype. We see it in many types of systems. Okay, right. Let's move on then. Asra, should we go to the workshop, or what's fun?
We can go to the workshop. If you want, we could take 2 questions from the chat. I think there's a lot around how can you make sure that you're discovering the right elements in the system? Like how can you validate if the relationships or the links that you've made are right?
Yeah. So talk to the people in the system, get as many perspectives, essentially do the best research you can, go out into the fields. And if this is a food system, go and talk to the farmers, go and talk to the businesses, go talk to the policymakers and so forth, and ultimately try and do the best research that you can and synthesize that up.
And another question around how can you limit the boundary while mapping the system?
Yeah. Well, you do experience that a lot of complexity as you go into it, but you're trying to synthesize things up to the level that you can deal with, right? Because there's a big problem we have in our societies across the board is analysis paralysis, where we do too much research and we get too much information, and then we can't go make decisions. No one knows what to do, and we get stuck. We get a gap between the research and the implementation. We see that on climate change across the board, right? So ultimately, you need to tell a relatively simple and compelling story about what's a complex phenomena, and you've got to synthesize it up effectively. So you're doing the best you can to kind of manage boundaries and always keeping a focus on your outcome, what you're trying to achieve, so you don't wander off into kind of trying to map everything.
We do have a question from Piers.
Yeah, Piers, do you want to unmute yourself?
Sure. So assuming that you've built the right community, you put the right parts of the map, you put the right plus and minuses, the right feedback loops, and you've developed the right archetype to determine what's happening to the deep structure of the map as a whole. With that said, if we're looking at a map like the one on the screen right now, what is your best advice to determine once we get from what we get there to something that can be practically implementable out in the world using the map as a sense-making device?
Yeah, so that's what we're going to cover next week, right? Intervention points, leverage points, and that is the natural next step. So we're going to be talking about that next week. It's a great question. Just covering mapping this week. So should we move on then?
Okay, so we are now here. Just if you can follow me, or
You could grab the screen if you want to, Asra. Or...
I think it's better if you share the screen. That's okay.
Go for it.
So I will just bring everyone to me, so they're all here in this part of the section. And if you can see on the screen there, we are here for the workshop. We are trying to understand different factors affecting a challenge and how they are related. So first, we will start with the challenge statement, which is poverty in rural town in Brazil. There are really 2 concentric circles. We'll first start with the inner, the outer, first outer concentric circle, which is immediate factors. Grab a sticky and then put up the factors that you think are immediate and primary that contribute to the challenge statement that we have for today. After which I will help you with the next parts of the with this canvas here. Okay, so now we can start putting stickies in the outermost circle, quite relating to the factors that the sections there, social, economic, industry, and environmental. The secondary factors can be described as the ones that are leading or making these primary factors emerge. We can take another 2 minutes to do that. Um, we just put the four main. Sorry, so I'm just responding to the question on the chat. We just put the four main sections that we thought would influence, but if you think you can also include policy, it can be between social or anywhere there and highlight that section. Okay, so now what we do is we pull the dot from down below, and then we move it to a sticky that we think it is. Oh, so now we move this dot to a sticky that we think is quite critical to address this challenge. So you can take some time to go through the stickies, maybe a minute or two, and then you can start voting on the factors that you think are most critical in addressing the challenge that we are dealing with today in this workshop.
Yeah, maybe take what, 3 or 5 dots? Yes, how many?
Oh.
Should we say 4 dots each person, please, to vote on the ones? Is this both primary and secondary, or?
Yeah, so you can dot vote for both primary and secondary. It would be good if you can take about 4 dots per person and then.
Take 1 minute.
I was thinking maybe it would take more than that because one needs to read the stickies as well.
Okay, 3 minutes. I think maybe we'll remove the connections for now because we're going to create those again afterwards.
Oh, okay, I put them there for an example, but that's okay. I can
Okay,
explain.
okay, we'll build them afterwards. Obviously, this is quite an artificial example, right? Where it's just an exercise, but in the real world, we would have gone out there and researched this topic and talked to people and, been in location and so forth, and maybe be something of an expert ourselves in this area or be able to talk to those people and brought in, what we thought the appropriate factors here, or maybe we're doing it like we're doing it here, right? This is collective mapping or participatory mapping, we would call it. And one of the challenges with that is we end up with a lot of ideas and a lot of them are duplicated. So what we're trying to do here is synthesize them up, right? Through the dot voting is a great way of doing that. And we can now, Asra, should we take out the ones that, or just keep the most voted?
Yeah, I think we can also invite people to express why they have voted on a particular factor before we move on to connecting them. I see that lack of access to education and population growth climate change did get a lot of votes. Would any of you who has voted on it can unmute yourself and express why you did that or your reasoning behind that?
So the top ones we got lack of access to education, limited employment opportunities, climate change, corruption, population growth or decline, lack of social welfare, and lack of industrial support. Should we color these ones differently or maybe take out some of the other ones?
I can maybe.
Maybe if we colored the other ones maybe in gray, Asra, and then they'd go into the background and we could maybe focus on these popular ones. And yeah, so this is a synthesizing exercise, right? Out of a lot of things, we're trying to create a few that are really important. Have we missed anything? Lack of access to preventative care. It's just so anything that got, let's just say 2 votes or more, we'll color it. And the other ones will put in the background. And I think we want to move on to connecting them, don't we, Asra?
Yeah, okay. So now we can start making connections for the ones that have been identified most critical for this challenge. It's quite simple. Maybe here we have a so we have lack of access to education, which can be because there is no proper infrastructure within schools, like there are underfunded schools, or I did see a sticky around lack of equipment at schools, but I can't find it at the moment. But yeah, please do make these connections between 2 factors that you think are quite relevant, and they actually influence each other. So this challenge is emerging and it's quite difficult to overcome that. So to make a connection, it's quite simple. You just click on the sticky and then you can draw a connection like that.
Yeah, so we'll just keep to the green ones at the moment and see what links you can draw. Should we set a timer or something? I guess it does depend what sort of, like a rural town. Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen agriculture in here very much.
I did see that, but then it's not the most voted one. It's
Yeah.
here under environmental.
Okay, they've got aging population also.
I think we can also consider the ones with one dot, just to get a broader overview of how these factors are connected to one another.
Mm. I don't see corruption anywhere. That could be a factor here.
It is there. I think it's also being connected to the other factors. Okay, now we are done with the time for connecting all these factors. I would be happy if one of you who has connected these factors can come and tell us why you think they were connected and how they were contributing. We can do that for about 2 minutes, and then we can move to understanding which actors are affecting these factors.
Oh yeah, we got corruption.
Mm.
So corruption is linking to lack of government support.
And to, yeah, mostly
Big,
to,
yeah, I mean, lack of access to education and lack of social welfare are kind of the biggest things here, aren't they?
also limited employment options is one of the most.
Yeah, and cost of income, cost of living. Overall economy. So I think, well, climate change, right? We've got that there in the secondary. Population growth or decline and aging population. So I think this is starting to reveal, some insight and potentially be able to start to tell a story. The visual aspect of maps is very interesting, the way it's showing us things visually, not just the dot voting, but also the connections too. We can see a lot of them are kind of going, as you mentioned, around education, cost of living, not enough income to make savings for big investments, employment opportunities, so lack of social welfare. So I think stepping back, you can already start to tell a bit of a story about that. And of course, part of what we're doing here is collective intelligence, right? Getting different people's input, all of you, there's almost 30 of us on the board, and trying to bring that in and synthesize it. Obviously, it gets a bit messy and a bit noisy, like we've seen here. Dot voting is a good way to try and synthesize up, because again, that's a collective intelligence kind of exercise in terms of what do we all think is relevant and important. And then the connections are also visualizing things for us. And now we can go and kind of, get rid of the gray stickies and make this look pretty. So that is part of it, actually, making things look pretty. So if we go back here, Viviana is a friend of mine, and she's the director of this company, and she makes these maps. And she makes an important point that you do need to make them look. This map here would be very messy if they hadn't done a lot of synthesizing up and cleaning it up and trying to get that structure. You can see the coloring and the way they've distributed out, and they create this kind of core structure here that helps people enter into it and make sense of it. It's a sense-making activity. So you do need to put work into that dimension of it. Also, what we've got is a bit messy, right? But we can, clean that up and pull out those main points and the connections. And then, of course, we could start talking about what are these linkages. So in here, we could say lack of access to education. You're linking that to underfunded schools. So we could talk about the type of relationship going on there. Of course, this is not a causal map, is it? Because these aren't variables. These are just elements in the system or factors in the system that we think are affecting the outcome in terms of poverty. We were going to go into actors, weren't we, Asra? Is that the plan?
Yep. I thought maybe we could also invite people to just talk about these connections that they made before we jump into the actors. But that's okay. So now we take a sticky of another color, perhaps blue, and then put it across a factor saying that which are the actors that affect this factor. Like I think lack of access to education would be because there are no properly trained teachers or well-trained professionals to explain to students what it is about. So I think one that goes there is teachers. You can also do the same for the other factors that you have voted on and talk about which actors are involved in that.
Yeah, so hopefully you're getting this idea. There's two different things here, factors and actors. Factors are the things, and actors are the people or organizations associated with them. Ultimately, we would want, at this stage in our process of, the overall Systems Innovation Initiative, we want to start asking questions about who are the key stakeholders, how can we both understand them, their values, their mental models, their power and influence, and their relationships, and think about, if we're thinking about an initiative here, like trying to change the scenario around poverty in these towns, well, who's for that? Who's against that? Who can block it? Who are enablers? Who's going to work with us? Who's going to work against us? Government's getting blamed for a lot of things here, isn't it?
Okay, so I see that there's a lot around how different ministries within the government need to take that ownership and help set up the whole system for overcoming the poverty. I see a few other around multinational corporations and the companies that can help with the employment opportunities, and also just the teachers and doctors and so on. I think I hope you got a bit of sense of how to draw the system map, how to connect different factors together and understand which stakeholder is involved or is responsible for this factor, and how can they help overcome that factor so there is a better system without the challenge. So so in this canvas today, what we did is we looked at the immediate factors contributing to the challenge that's present, and then understood what are the different secondary factors that are the reason why these primary factors emerged in the first place. like there is lack of quality education. This is because there is no proper schools, they are underfunded, or there is no good infrastructure, and there is no well-trained teachers that are available. So and then after we did that, we voted on the most critical factors that we thought were that were critical to address the challenge statement that we took for today. And then we started drawing these connections between different factors, and now we see that a lot of now this actually helps us take insights to what actions we can take further and where we can intervene in the system, so a better situation starts to emerge. So this is what we did in our canvas today. We will talk about leverage points in the next session. So just would you help us get an overview of the presentation?
Sure.
And then
Any quick questions about this exercise or comments about this exercise? Make sense? Okay, great. Alrighty, so what we covered today, we talked about the basics of systems mapping, and yeah, we're talking about systems here. So we looked at that model of, boundary elements, interrelationships, and function, and inputs and outputs, and zoomed in on the internal workings of that, the elements and interrelationships, and looked at this cup of tea and what it took to make that. We talked about the causal relationships between things. Well, here we're just looking at the elements and the factors affecting things. So we had this one around poverty, like we just did, and we looked at a bit of an actor map, and the ways we saw that we can structure maps in very different ways, right? It depends on what we're trying to achieve. We started to move into the idea of causal relationships between elements, and whether the variables are moving in the same way or different directions, and positive or negative causal relationships, what those mean, and went on to talk about feedback loops, and we can have these self-reinforcing, amplifying positive feedback loops, or we can have these balancing negative feedback loops, and there can be whole cycles that are going on like this, and they're creating an underlying system dynamic that we'll see repeating in that system because it's set up, and one thing's affecting another, and coming back. And often it takes time to understand these and figure these out. We often just see the events, like something's changing here, and then we don't know, we saw something else change over here. We can't make those connections. It takes a lot of research and mapping to figure those out and start to determine those causal relationships. We saw how complex these maps can get with the one on obesity, and we talked about archetypes, commonly reoccurring patterns we see across different systems because of those underlying dynamics and causal relationships. And then we went into talking make your own map over here, right? And it got a bit messy because there was many of us here, and that's one scenario, right? It's an exercise where we don't know much about this, and we're a random group of people thrown together. Quite often we might be in a lab, a small team of researchers who have months to kind of research this scenario, and we're carefully working through the factors. Like Didiana down here, Liliana, these often take about 6 months to make a map like this, and they do a lot of research and bring it together, create those causal relationships, and then, as mentioned, they've got to do quite a bit of work to make that look pretty in the end, so that they can go back to their clients and say, look, this is what we believe is going on. And then, as mentioned, coming out of that, we'll start to think about those intervention or leverage points, and that's where we're going next week.
yeah, so this is a session that's happening next week where we learn about the different ways in which we can take interventions, the leverage points. So this is the link that you can use to register yourself for the event that's happening on the 16th of April, next Wednesday at 6 p.m. CET. On the screen now, you see where you can access the learning series, and this link here will take you to the page of learning series on the network. On this page, you will look at syllabus feed and events that are coming up under learning series. You can also connect with others who are part of the series. Now we are here for taking your feedback. We would love some feedback, and we hope to also just manage to use the feedback that you do in our next session, so it's a good experience for all of you. And I've been just copying few of the feedback from the comments to the stickies here, but I would encourage you to directly put them there. Also, here are a list of resources that you can look up if you would like to explore this topic in more depth. And you can always watch the recording. We will post it in the link in the feed tomorrow of the learning series page on the network. And hope to see you next week on Wednesday at the same time. Thank you all for joining us today.
Great. Take care, guys. I'll see you next week, hopefully.
Thanks, everyone.